Good evening once again, everyone, and welcome to today's session. So this is part 2 of our Agile webinar. Nadia was here about a month ago, and she taught us lots of wonderful stuff, but she felt there was so much information to share and she needed more time, and she offered to come back and teach us more. So today is part 2 of the webinar. On behalf of the team here, this is to say a very big thank you to Nadia. Nadia, we appreciate all you do for us, taking out your time. I know how much time it takes to put together a presentation deck. And this is the second time within 2 months. Thank you so much for your time.
Glad to be here. Really flattered to be invited again. Thank you.
Okay, so housekeeping. This webinar should run for just about an hour. We would ask everyone to remain muted unless you have something to say, but you have to put up your hand and then you can be allowed to make a comment or ask a question at the appropriate time. If there are poll questions, we would encourage you to respond promptly so that we can continue with the presentation or with the webinar for the day. If you have questions, please type it into the chat.
Of disobeying orders.
And we'll be happy to take your questions at the appropriate time. So let me quickly about Career Aid Up. So we are a group of professionals dedicated to supplying Black and visible minorities succeed in their careers because we want them to be able to contribute meaningfully to the socioeconomic growth of the community. Our mission is to provide a safe space where members can network, learn, and grow in their careers. We also we do free training as time permits and when we have resources to facilitate those training. We do coaching and mentoring. We also support members to review their resumes and we do mock interviews for targeted job postings.
She's coming. She's on the top floor.
She's on the top.
Okay. We also do webinars just like what we are doing this evening. And in the past, we've provided internship opportunities. Hopefully in the future, we would have more slots to do that. And we do this in the areas of business analysis, project management, change management, agile, business intelligence, data analytics. So about our speaker today, Nadia is a senior business analyst. She's a project lead. She works mainly with application and product development. She has worked on projects in different areas, including commercial, airline, raising, ERP, and more. She's also a certified business analyst and she lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
It's a major repair.
So without further ado, I will just hand it over to Nadia to start off today.
All right. Thanks, Catherine. Let me share my screen and we can start.
Sure.
It's a major repair.
People should talk. Let me try.
See. Okay. Technical.
It's a major.
Yeah, me. People should talk. Let me try.
So, as Catherine mentioned, this is part 2 to a presentation that we did about a month ago that was presenting Agile in general. However, I can say that people that did not participate in the previous
it's a major.
People should talk. Let me try.
Still be able to follow this one, I believe, because Agile is a very broad approach, and we can talk about different aspects and topics for a very long time. And
it's a major.
And I feel that a lot of them
talk. Let me try.
sort of build on each other. And as long as you understand the main idea and the skeleton, you can
it's a major.
Yeah, me.
Topics
People should talk. Let me try.
branch out from that main skeleton that can be discussed. And then even if you haven't been part of discussion 1 and 2, you might still
It's a
be able to
major-
Yeah,
participate
me,
in
oh.
discussion 3
People
and
should
4.
talk. Let me.
So I'm hoping that this presentation will be clear to everyone, regardless of whether they participated in the previous one or not. But even if you list the previous one and you feel like some areas are still lacking, or you want a bit more clarity or access to the previous one, Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the previous one is available on YouTube, right? All right, so let's talk about Agile, part 2. First off, sorry, this shouldn't be here. So first off, let's remind ourselves a few principles. The few principles that are, in my opinion, are the skeleton of what Agile means. Of course, these are not the 12 principles, that's not exhaustive, but the main important ones. And I'm sharing, sorry, just to make sure which one of my screens I'm sharing. Hang on. Do you guys see the slide with Agile reminder of principles or something else? All right, sorry. Okay, cool. It's just have 2 screens and I wanted to make sure. All right, so Agile methodologies aim to deliver the right product with incremental and frequent delivery of small chunks of functionality through small cross-functional self-organizing teams, enabling frequent customer feedback and course correction as needed. That's a mouthful. That's a lot. And the sentence takes maybe 10 times to read to internalize and understand each part. Therefore, let's break it down. Incremental delivery, frequent delivery, small chunks of functionality, small cross-functional self-organizing teams, enabling frequent customer feedback, course correction as needed. So we discussed those principles at length last time. And we mentioned lots of benefits to those. But is everything pink and nice and beautiful, and are there no challenges? Like with anything in life, of course, there are challenges with Agile as well. I'm going to give you just a few ideas of where challenges may arise from each one of those basic skeleton principles. And of course, those are not exhaustive, but that gives us an opportunity to stop and think and maybe branch off to different and additional challenges from there. So incremental delivery. Incremental delivery means that we're not working for a year now and delivering a whole bunch of features. If say we're working on a new application, we won't be working for a year now and bringing this whole huge product to the market at once and say, here you go. No, we break it down to small parts, and that's called an increment. And the timeline is also broken to increments. So what is the right increment? One of the challenges that a lot of teams are facing is defining the optimal length of an increment. How long should we be working for 2 weeks, 4, 5, a month, maybe 2 months? Really depends. Maybe just a week. It really depends. So the suggested and recommended length would usually be 2 to 4 weeks. But I can tell you that I've been on different teams, and for different teams, different length work. And I've also been on teams that found it very, very, very hard to decide which length works for them. And they tried different approaches. So within a span of 6 months, for example, we moved from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 3 weeks because we were trying what works best for us. So small, yes, but what is small? That's definitely a question. And that is a challenge to define the right increment, length of an increment. What is the right breakdown of scope to increments? Okay, let's say that we've decided on 2 weeks length, 3 weeks length. What do we do with that time? we have that whole huge basket of everything we want to develop, but how do we break it down? Might sound trivial, but once you start thinking about dependencies, what precedes to what, functionality that might be related, and you sit and you think about that and you say, but how can I break it to 2 different increments? If I work on this now and then leave it and then come back to that again later, I'm wasting resources, for example. So again, there is a lot to discuss here. That is definitely a point that presents a certain challenge. What is the right scope to include in each increment? And I'm not going to offer answers at this time. The purpose of what we're doing here is to continue on the discussion from last time and help you see different points that make this approach maybe not as ideal as a methodology, sorry, not as ideal as it might initially look. Not only that, those points can help you organize your team, your new team once you join a team, or maybe the existing one, more efficiently.
Is a major
If you just have
People should
all
talk. Let
those
me try.
points readily available. Next, frequent delivery. Again, something that we want to do. As a principle, we want to not work for a year, but we want to deliver, to show results frequently. Maybe not every increment. Here's again, what is the optimal frequency? How often do we want to show results? And what does results mean? What does delivery mean? Frequent delivery. What does it mean? Does it mean that I frequently give my clients some kind of result? Or does delivery mean that I bundle a bunch of code and I say, that's done, that's tested, and that is ready. And then I set it aside and do the next batch. That's also called kind of delivery. For different teams, for different setups, different approaches can work. Saying frequent delivery might sound trivial, but in practice, when you think about that, it's not always. Depends on lots of factors. Small chunks of functionality, again, might sound trivial. Well, I'll just break it down. I'll just do that one feature. However, what is too small and what is not small enough? My client wants to build an application where, amongst other things, one of the features they requested, for example, is that their users can create their own profile. And that's how they give it to me. I want that feature. Is this feature too small? Is it not small enough? It's really important to analyze every feature, every requirement, every set of scope, every bunch of scope that is being discussed and estimated. It's really important to discuss and assess it properly. Not to make it too small. Say, again, going back to my example, my client wants the user to have access to my account. If I break it down and I say one piece of functionality is just that one screen, maybe that's too small. But if I say that a small chunk of functionality is letting them go from the home screen to my account screen, and back, maybe that is a small enough but not too small piece of functionality. Again, depends on a lot of factors, amongst them how broad is your scope, how in depth is your current scope goes. Does your current scope goes? Again, not trivial. It depends on other factors like what is the end result, how extensive is that end product that you are intending to deliver to the market or to the client, or bring to that finish line that you've identified. What is too small and what is not small enough? That is a question that personally I ask myself.
Take it easy.
With
Take it easy, Baba.
every
Take it easy.
with every new feature, with every requirement that I analyze, I try to look at it from very in a very petty way, if you will. Do not make it too small, but again, so it's substantial enough, so it delivers enough value. Small cross-functional self-organizing teams. This one can be discussed at length, but I'm just going to suffice by saying, just think about that for a second. Small cross-functional and self-organizing teams. On teams, we typically need a variety of roles. And not all roles can be, and sometimes it is a challenge to make everyone available and to the team, and everyone is busy 100% of the time. One of the most typical roles that is posing a challenge in this respect is UI UX, design people. We don't always need them 100% of their time on our project. If I work 40 hours a week, I don't necessarily need a UI UX person on my team to also work 40 hours a week. I might need a short consultation from them once in a while, say 10 hours a week. But then what do I do with the other 30? Because we're supposed to be cross-functional, self-organizing team. So again, there are ways to approach that, say share resources between the teams. But if you think about that, sharing resources between teams might break this principle. Some may argue that it breaks this principle. Ideally, we'd like to have one of each, at least one of each on a team, so the team is cross-functional. So that's on this. Again, it can be discussed at length, and just for the sake of the other topics, I'm going to just skip and leave you with the thought. Keep thinking about it. You'll see how non-trivial that might sometimes be. Enabling frequent customer feedback. Again, it's a very nice concept. It's a very useful concept. Very, very useful concept. It gives us an opportunity to course correct early on instead of once we've done even more work. However, what it requires time. Time can be one of the most valuable resources we have at any project. And the customer needs to make time to sit down with us and review our results and give us feedback. The team, even if it's not the whole team, but at least one person on the team needs to make time to sit with the customer and receive the feedback. So it's already at least two people that need to spend time on making time in their agenda in whatever they're doing to create that feedback and provide this feedback. And later on, even and process this feedback, obviously. So as much as useful as frequent feedback could be, it might be hard to accommodate if we don't plan our work correctly. So, and to that, I'll just kind of quickly say that understanding that this is a challenge with this principle, but also understanding how critical this principle is. Personally, when I plan a project, I always put those meetings, those touch points in the schedule early on as a must, because if we don't schedule them ahead of time, they tend to not happen or happen not frequently enough. So that is something to not just slide by and say, we'll schedule that demo when we have time. No, having preset times for those feedbacks could sometimes be very critical. Last but not least, core correction as needed. Again, it's a great principle. However, if we incorporate feedback and need to make changes, need to course correct, it means that something else is not going to be done. So on one hand, we plan ahead. We have a horizon. We have a roadmap. We know, we plan. We don't know. We plan. We're saying once, say we're meeting once in 3 months, 6 months to decide on that roadmap. We have all this great plan. We'll deliver feature A and B and C And then while working on A, we're receiving feedback that that is very important. Something changes, the business needs change, goes right in and pushes feature B and C away. So course correction is great, but it often comes on account of other plans that we had in place. And mind you that the plans were in place, so it's not only that you planned for that, and you as the development team planned for that, you had the resources booked for that. The customer developed expectation to have that in place. And although they kind of understand that whatever change you accommodated doesn't leave much room for everything, it's like a child. They understand you don't have money for everything, but they still want everything. So very important, but needs to be treated very carefully, how we accommodate change. So that's kind of, it's really just to touch on every one of those principles, just to give you an idea, maybe open your thinking about them. Now let's take a closer look at some of them, at a few of them. How do we implement Agile in day-to-day life? So this is definitely not a webinar, it's not a conversation for 1 hour. But what we can do, and what I decided to do here so we can use our time efficiently and give you enough value, is to focus on sets of certain principles and show what they mean in how we organize a project, how we work, how we analyze, and so on. Let's take those 4. Incorporating feedback into planning, incremental delivery, frequent delivery, and small chunks of functionality. Those 4 lead us to a very important principle approach, call it whatever you want, that is only available with Agile, and that is MVP. And for those of you who haven't heard this term before, that means minimum viable product. What does minimum viable product mean? MVP development is a way to verify business assumptions for customer software, test hypothesis, ideas, or test demand for a new product with minimum investment. That's a handful, so I'll just give you an example. Going back to my example that I gave a few minutes ago about my client wanting to create a new mobile application. They have a huge vision of what that application will do. Say I'm working with a telecommunications company and they want, for the first time ever, to create an application that lets their customers see their accounts, how they're set, to choose plans, to make payments. They have this whole basket of what they want. They want to do what their competition does, to provide all those features. Now, to go for the whole deal from the get-go, it's an approach, valid in certain cases. However, MVP tells us differently. MVP says, we need to make sure that we understand the market correctly. In the basis of all those features that our customer decided they wanted, there were some hypotheses about what their customers need. There were some ideas that, oh, it would be nice if our application did ABC. At that point, those are just ideas. Those are just hypotheses that those would deliver value to their clients. And the best way to test this is create a small version, right? So keep that in mind for a second. Let's organize our thoughts. So minimum viable product is only essential features with maximum value plus maximum amount of validated learning with least efforts. So the purpose of an MVP, I'll show you two options and you choose, quietly in your head, you choose which one you think it is. Is it the best? Is it the best? Be the best version of the intended idea? What is the MVP meant to be? The best version of the intended idea, or something, a solution that would invoke interest plus provide insights? So I think if you combine this and everything we just said, it makes it, you'll see clearly that it's not this, it's this. It's a small version of only those features, and maybe even minimum versions of those features, because anyone who ever worked on any development can attest to the fact that any feature can be layered. We can make a micro version, a mini version, a normal version, any feature can be extended. So with an MVP, it's critical to choose, first of all, choose the features that give the maximum value to the end client, not my client, to the end client, and allow to test those hypotheses that the sponsor had in mind. Again, in my example, maybe allowing customers to make payments through the application is not the most important thing. Maybe they're all used to making their payments through their banks or in cash or whatever. Maybe that feature will barely be used. So if we spend months and months on developing that feature with the greatest version of that feature, with all the bells and whistles, that would be, simply speaking, a waste of time. However, if we include in our MVP version a very small feature, very basic version of that feature, that will allow to test whether or not the end user is even interested in this feature. So it's not trivial. Defining what an MVP does, believe me, I've been there. It's not trivial by any means, and there is never the right answer. There's just the answers that we decide to go with. Okay? So let's give an example of what an MVP is. Just kind of, if you search the internet for an example of an MVP, you will most probably come across what I'm going to show you now. So, because somehow it was invented, I don't know, don't remember when, someone drew that example, became very popular, and it's being used in a lot. So let's say that I have a customer that comes to me and says, I need to get faster from A to B. Please build me a car. That's what my customer tells me. So what we can do, we can make a plan like that. We can make a plan that is incremental, delivers in pieces, small chunks of functionality. Look at that. All the principles are there. Small chunks of functionality. We add something else every time. It's not all at once. So we have the increment 1, 2, 3, 4, and the product is growing with every increment. So in theory, that makes sense. However, delivery team number 2 comes up with a different plan. They say, we'll first build a scooter, a skateboard, then we'll build a scooter, then we'll build a bicycle, then we'll build a bike, and then we'll build a car. Why? And that is the MVP approach. Why? Because this plan is not usable. I cannot put this to use. I cannot give this, or the results of the first stage cannot be given to the customer and say, hey, test your hypothesis. They can't use one wheel to do that. But if I give them a skateboard and I say, you needed to get faster from A to B, here, take a skateboard, you'll make it faster from A to B. They can test it and they can say, you know what, this doesn't work for me because it's not fast enough, because I'm exposed to weather conditions and 1,000 other reasons. But that allows me to get the feedback. So this is a very simplified example, but this is an example. It gives you a visual to what an MVP is and what an MVP isn't. So essentially that. All right, next. So typical steps when we're planning an MVP are to do discovery of an MVP. As I mentioned, to sit and plan what goes into our MVP, what is needed, what hypotheses we want to test, how we're going to test them, which is also important because that's how we're going to test certain hypotheses may lead to what version of the feature we choose or how to implement those features. It really is important to sit and plan. Then we do a proof of concept or prototyping. This item by itself could be a topic for a full lecture, so I'm not going to cover them now just because it's a lot. But prototyping is essentially creating something visual, ideally clickable, testable, whatever makes sense for whatever product we're working on, something that can be touched and somehow felt to whether or not we're in the right direction. Recently, a lot of teams started using Figma. If you guys have heard this term, Figma is a prototyping tool that allows not just to create screenshots, but also transition between the different screenshots. So again, allows you to understand the movement. So with any mobile application development, with any web solution application, web applications and web solution development, makes it very, very cool and very convenient to use. But that's just one example. It really depends on the area you're working in, the project you're working in. So prototyping just as an item to create something that can visualize whatever MVP you're going for. Then the actual development. Development of a plan. Our timelines, our budget, what skills we'll need on the team. Do we need a UI UX person? Do we need a QA person? And so on and so on. Then the actual coding, MVP development. Then MVP launch, set it out to the users. And a critical 6, monitoring and analysis of assumptions, performance, etc. Essentially 6 is why we did 1 through 5. Without 6, 1 through 5 was a waste of time and waste of time.
A free 60-minute presentation. If I promise to show you
Someone's not muted, sorry guys. Okay. So 6, as mentioned, it's critical. That's why we did the whole shebang. Now let's quickly take a look. And you might come and say, well, it takes a lot of time. Why would we do this? I want to go with the whole thing. How would my end user or my end customer be interested in half a product when they have all those competitors in the market? All those valid. I can relate to all those points and questions, and still we have some great examples from real life of solutions that started as an MVP. Here's just a few of them. Dropbox, Amazon, Groupon, Zappos, Airbnb, Facebook, AngelList, Buffer, and it goes on and on. If we think about how an Airbnb website looks today, that's a lot for us. It's very convenient. It's a great website to use. I know that I use it a lot. Every time I'm planning a vacation, that's the first website I go to. Not booking.com, not hotels.com, nothing else. I go to Airbnb. But it started as an MVP. It started as a very minimum version. Facebook. Think about Facebook. I'm sure that if you think about a span of 5 years, you will remember how different Facebook was and looked every time. Let's look at Facebook closer. You all probably know this by now, so I'm just going to refresh your memory. And if you don't know the history of Facebook, I really encourage you to watch the movie Social Network, I think it's called, about how Facebook was created. It was fun to watch, especially knowing how Facebook looks right now, and all the large names that comes with it. So original pre-launch version of Facebook. The name was not even Facebook, it was FaceMash. Target crowd was only Harvard students. Release date, October 28, 2003. And the idea was a website that was set up as a type of a hot or not type of game for Harvard students. So think about how narrow the purpose was. The purpose was childish. The purpose was meant to allow Harvard students to look at pictures and say, this one's hot and this is not. That's it. Very basic. And here's how it looks. That's a screenshot of FaceMash. Today, as we all know, it's called, launch version. That was the original pre-launch version. So going as far ahead as not even 3 months ahead, they already developed to the next version, the launch. By the time they were ready to launch the product, it was already different because they had a chance to test the original version, the FaceMash. They renamed it the Facebook. Target crowd was expanded from only Harvard students to most universities in US and Canada. I remind you, not even 3 months. Just a bit over 3 months, I apologize. November, December, and January. That's it. That's the amount of time that it took them to understand what they're working with and take their idea to the next step and launch a different product. Idea also developed by them to create a website that would connect people from Harvard University, and then right after, even further, online directory that connects people through social network at colleges and universities. So guys, think about that again. From a simple, childish, stupid game of hot or not, within just 3 months, it goes to this huge of an idea that is meant for colleges and universities across North America, US and Canada. That's no longer childish, that's no longer small. That's a huge idea, and we know how quickly it took off. Look at that, even the UI changed. And I'm going to jump again. From FaceMash, from this, within 3 months, they tested their idea, they had results, and they developed it further to this. Now, needless to say that Facebook developed from this even further, with all the bells and whistles that they added, with the constant changes in UI. We all know it. Facebook today is not even close to the version that we had 5 years ago, let alone this. So the second your head tries to think that an MVP is not worth it, that an MVP is a waste of time, think about Facebook again. All right. So if you can leave you just with one thought about MVP, punchline. If you're not ashamed of your MVP, it's not a good MVP. It's not my sentence, not going to take credit for it. I heard it at a different lecture just recently, loved it. Because really, people tend to want everything in the first version. It's not right. You need to include as minimal in your first version as possible. And again, if it's not too small, if it's not too simple, if you're not ashamed of your first version, it's not an MVP. I mean, it might be a pilot version. It might be a first version of your product, but it's definitely not an MVP. So if you remember anything from this version, it might be pilot version, webinar, might be sour. Remember this: if you're not ashamed of your MVP, it's not a good MVP. Probably not an MVP. Probably more. Right? Now, take number 2. Let's take another set of principles and look at them closer. Cross-functional self-organizing teams, course correction as needed, frequent delivery, and incorporate feedback. Those four lead us to think about process flow. How do we organize work so everyone's busy enough? So we actually have those frequent deliveries, so we can incorporate feedback and essentially all principles. But if I wanted to isolate a number of them to discuss what I'm going to discuss now, I would isolate those 4. How do we build our process flow so it's efficient? This slide is going to be a lot, so I'm going to present it in pieces as we go, as I keep explaining. For your reference, role legend in the bottom here. For those of you who haven't been on development teams for too long, or maybe just starting their journey in the software development, please refer to this legend. It will make the acronyms easier to read. Okay, so product owner, BAs, business analysts, UI UX is design team, devs is developers, those who actually write the code, QA is testing team, UAT is user acceptance testing, and DM is delivery manager. Handful, but again, just a legend for your easy reference. So process flow. Devs is developers. For those of you who were in the previous webinar, you'll probably remember the components and the stages of a cycle, of what comprises the process of our delivery. And first is requirements. So, and I differentiate that to main player and support players. So at this stage, I think we all can agree that the main player is product owner, that the person who owns the roadmap, the person who actually tells us what are the business needs, and the business analyst, because they do the most work. But they cannot work in a vacuum. They need support. So we have support players. Well, at least that's how I differentiate them. That's how I invite you to look at that as well. And the support players, in my perspective, are developers, because as analysts, we often have questions. Well, great, we know that there is a need for that, but we have questions about technologies, we have questions about feasibility, so on and so on. So devs are the people to consult for that purpose. Next, we have design. At this stage, the main players are BA and the design team, because they're with BA's guidance. And again, I'm simplifying just for the sake of the discussion. There's always edge cases, there's always different teams, different behaviors, different composition. But again, happy path. Okay. So the main player for the design stage is obviously BA and UI UX, because BA already received the information from product, the guidance from product owner, did the analysis, we need to design. So usually when it's properly structured, the design team does that. Support players are, again, developers and QA as well at this stage. Well, actually at this stage as well. I should have mentioned QA here as well. But the idea is that to see that we have the main players and support players. The reason I'm differentiating that is because main players will be busy 100% of the time at this point. Support players are usually those who do not have enough work to be busy 100% of the time at this stage. No, developers will not be busy 100% of the time giving me advice on how to analyze or whatever questions I have around requirements. It's so about designs. So keep that thought in mind. Then we have development, at which stage development team becomes the main player, and BAs plus QAs are the support team. Then we have testing. At this point, the QA team becomes the main player, and everyone else becomes the supporting players. Deployment, at which case it's again developers, the main players usually. BA and delivery manager are supporting roles, and review, at which at this point, in my perspective, it's the whole team. So look at this. We can assign work and tasks to almost anyone, to almost any stage of the game. However, as mentioned, this line will not be busy 100% of the time at this point. So how do we organize our work so we're efficient? Because we're supposed to be a small, self-sufficient cross-functional team, meaning that all those people need to be one team, they need to be busy. Oh, okay, so here's what my teams were doing not recently, but most of my teams, when they were efficient, they were doing this, what we'll show now. Think about a cycle, 6 weeks, doesn't matter, just arbitrarily broke it into 6 weeks. So every stage takes a week for the simplicity of this discussion. And say that this is a cycle. What my teams usually did is run additional cycles in parallel. So obviously there will here, where there's nothing showing, there will be the ending of cycle 0. And once those start to fill up, you'll see that, yeah, I should have mentioned the roles here. Sorry, that's my gap. I should have mentioned them here, but development, I'll remind you, during development, the development team is the main player, whereas the BA and QA are the supporting team. However, for this stage, for cycle 2, it flips. BA is the main role here with product owner, and developers are the supporting team. So we combine them. We combine opposites at this week. And while development team is working at what I defined here for cycle 1, I will already be looking at cycle 2, because that allows me to be 100% busy and not just sit there and wait for their questions. And so on and so on. You'll see that we overlap the main player with support player at every one of those stages. And it can go on and go on. Cycle 3 will do the same. By the time development stage of cycle 2 comes around, BA will start cycle 3, and so on. And once you stagger those, you're able to get a much, much better utilization of your team. Your team can actually be self-sufficient and can be small because, it can be small and self-sufficient because you don't need to share resources with other projects. You found a way to make everyone busy all the time. I'm hoping that that makes sense. All right, last but not least, let's discuss another set of principles in the last 2 minutes that we have left. Cross-functional self-organizing team, again, frequent delivery, and incorporate feedback. That leads us to, those lead to defects and bug triage. So here's what I want you to think about. Sorry. Just 1 second, I apologize. All right, So here's what I want to think. For those of you who got a chance to work on software, on development projects, you will know that once testing starts, everything becomes an issue. Every time that the QA team finds something that does not work as they expect, or as their test cases say, they will call it an issue. Sorry, wrong slide, shouldn't have been here. Sorry, oh, right, I'll stop here. That's the slide I was looking for. So they report an issue. Some teams, when they don't do proper triage, automatically call those bugs. Try to incorporate this immediately into work, because that's what we're supposed to do in Agile. Found a bug, we should fix it. I say stop here for a moment. Let's look at that issue closer. And I purposely refuse to call those bugs. What I tell my teams is, we don't call whatever you found a bug until we do the triage. Why? You'll see why in a second. So let's run through a quick thought process here. An issue is reported. Let's ask the question, is something wrong? Or is it just that something could be better? Like, we don't have an error message that is self-explanatory. The system just says error, right? Could be a bug. We could otherwise just say, oh, we could be better. We could make that error message self-sufficient. So first we ask the question, is something wrong? Or whatever we found indicates that something could just be made better. Now, what I suggest, the way I suggest to look at it, is, again, it's not my personal opinion. If we say that this issue is indicating that something is wrong, say system breaks where it shouldn't be breaking, then we'll ask, then it's a bug, sir, then it's a bug. But does it end here? If it's a bug, does it mean that we need to incorporate it into work immediately? I say no. Let's ask another question. Oh, sorry. If it's something wrong, then it's a bug. But if it just means that something could be made better, I call it improvement. Leave this for a second. Let's go back to the bug. That's what I meant. Sorry, I did the animations in the wrong order, I guess. So I'm asking the next question. Is whatever we're experiencing reproducible in production? And a note here, this question is obviously relevant only for products that are already in systems and solutions that are not in their first iteration. When we already have something in production and we keep working on further improvements. We found something. We decided that it's a bug. Yeah, it's something that is not working properly. But I asked the next question. Is it new? Is it new with this code? Or is it something that is reproducible in production? So if the answer is no, it's not reproducible in production, that is clearly misimplementation of current scope, because we broke something now. Otherwise, I say if it is reproducible in production, I say that it's a pre-existing issue. Now, if it's an improvement, I'll ask the same question again. Is it reproducible in production? Now, if the answer is no, I'll ask another question. Is this requirement in the user story? If it is, then it's a requirement from current scope that is not implemented. Otherwise, when requirement is not in the user story, I say it's a missed requirement in current scope. Back to that error message, maybe there was no requirement from the get-go to make the error message self-explanatory. There was no requirement. We were not supposed to plan for it. Okay? Otherwise, if it is reproducible in production, then it's just a pre-existing room for improvement. Now, I know that we're very short on time, so I'm not going to say a lot more about those. I wanted to present the notion of the fact that not every issue is a bug. Issues can and should be analyzed further and broken into at least those 5 groups, because those groups, and they're purposely showing top to bottom here, because there's different priority on different issues. This one, when it's a pre-existing room for improvement in an active product, it's the lowest one on my list. If I don't have time for it in this situation, I don't have budget, it's not included. It's something that was requested, defined, and not properly implemented. Of course, it needs to be included in the work immediately. And even if we were not planning for it, if we were planning to proceed to the next feature, but we discover that something that we thought is done, not done correctly or properly, of course, needs to be incorporated into work immediately. But those are just the 2 obvious ones. I can tell you that many teams make the mistake of not doing this triage, call everything a bug. It pushes them even further into spiraling, not having enough time, not having enough budget, because they spent resources where they didn't necessarily need to be spent or could be spent later. All right, I took a bit more time than I expected with this, so we're left with only a few minutes for a quick Q&A. But I think we covered quite a few very important principles in working with Agile today. Let's leave a few minutes for Q&A. So I don't know who's watching the list, but Catherine, I think that would be you, right?
Okay, I'll go first with my question, but first I want to thank you so much for all the illustrations, and thank you for the story about Facebook, the evolution and all of that.
I thought it was fun.
Yeah, my first question is, so the bug, do we include it into the backlog even before triaging and analyzing to know the reported issue? Does it go into the backlog, or do we have to do the triad before we put it in the backlog?
I always suggest to my teams to put it in a special bucket. And if we're working with Agile boards, for example, I will always have a non-active sprint that will only be meant for that. I do not allow QA teams to put bugs or issues into the sprint or into the product backlog. I have them put in a special bucket so they're easy to review. And only once we review them, they go in the right bucket, in the sprint or in the product backlog. Because you know what? The product owner could look at that issue when it's this, for example, and say, I'm not interested in this pre-existing room for improvement. I don't need it. Don't even put it in the backlog, in the product backlog. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Kemi, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, okay, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
For example,
I think we lost you.
okay, sorry. For example, I have someone asking if, just a moment, let me go back to that question. Somebody was asking if MVP is the same as smoke. Just a moment, something like smoke.
I think I saw that.
Smoke test?
Smoke testing.
No, absolutely not. Smoke testing is an approach to how a solution is tested, like actually QA'd, to verify whether or not it's working or there are bugs. MVP is a definition of scope. If you will, it's a size of your solution, how small or large it is. Smoke test is how do we test that MVP? That MVP can be tested, regression tested, it could be smoke tested. If I had to define what a smoke test is in 2 words, well, in a sentence, it will be a very quick test through the main features to make sure that they're not broken. That's it. So it's completely different dimensions.
Thanks so much. Anthony, I hope that answered your question. So you can put up your virtual hand if you have any other question for Nadia this evening.
Sorry, I do have another person asking for the name of the movie. You did make mention of a movie. Someone is asking if you could give us the name of the movie
I think
again.
it's called Social Network. History of Facebook, or maybe all of the above. I don't remember for sure. I watched it a few years ago, but just Google it for history of Facebook movie. It'll come up immediately. There is only one, and it's fun, I think.
Thank you.
So I have another question directed at me here. I'm just seeing it. It says, when you say reproducible, what does that actually mean?
Reproduce the bug, meaning that we're trying to make the bug happen again with different data in different environment with the different in different conditions. Can we make it happen again?
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. Yeah, everyone says it's a great session. I think for me, you broke it down with the graphics. You were telling more stories than can be imagined. So if we don't have any questions, we can show Nadia some love in the comments. Nadia, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time, your wealth of experience with us again this evening. We are truly, truly grateful. Someone is asking, can we get a copy of the slide?
I apologize, that's proprietary.
Okay, so yeah, she's not sharing the slide, but you can go, the video is available online. So you can go watch and, pause where you need to take notes and all of that and get as much information as you want. Thank you so much, Nadia. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Hope it was a fulfilling time for you. Hope you got value for your time spent with us this evening. Thank you so much. There's so many thank yous in the chat for you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I believe you will come back again. I know you don't know how to say no to us. So we're looking forward to having you again very soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Just need to think about what we can tell more.
Yeah, don't worry. There's always something new to learn.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good night, everyone.